thinking positive doesn't fucking help. Patrick Mahomes.
You've been credited as a major contribution to the success of his career.
My contribution to Patrick or Raheem, when someone said, how did you learn to focus and deal with pressure? I mentioned the work we did in college. Specifically this one exercise, he goes, he used to talk about and I still use it to this day.
What, in your mind, makes a superstar a superstar?
Kobe and Michael, two examples that everyone idolises as for their mentality, but quite honestly were psychopaths. When it gets to playoffs, egos start to get put to the side because we just got to fucking win.
Paddy, welcome to the podcast. We are here at the beautiful Music for a While studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Awesome to be here.
Let's start with, it's Feb 2020. I'm going to maybe misspell it. Raheem Mostert. How do I say
Mostert.
it? Mostert. I knew I knew it, but I knew I was going to get it wrong. So Raheem Mostert just played in a Super Bowl, and you've been credited as a major contribution to the success of his career. Mm-hmm. On top of that, you've worked with superstars like Patrick Mahomes. Have I said that right?
Patrick Mahomes.
Mahomes, fuck. Patrick Mahomes and Joel Embiid.
Uh-huh.
I know Joel, it's having basketball.
There
Not
Good.
I did my
We're getting there.
I did my research on those names as well, and I still
You need to go to the search tab in Google. You can do audio of like how are you supposed to say this word.
I did that.
Yeah. Oh, it didn't work.
It just didn't work. It
Fuck
didn't
you,
stick.
Google.
Didn't stick. But anyway, so you've worked with superstars like Joel Embiid, but I want to take you back. I want to take us back to 2001. You've just been dropped from your professional AFL career with Richmond after years of injuries, no playing time. Tell me about that period of your life. Tell me about that period of your life and how it set the stage for all the successes to follow.
Fuck, what a question. What a great question. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. That sounded like I said, that's a shit question. But gee, you lifted me and then dumped me right in it. And I literally felt that because you're talking about like my life over here has been blessed. My life as an AFL footballer was not. And I felt my guts drop when you said, let's go back to 2001. I'm like, oh, fuck. Yeah, I thought my life was over. Not in the, literal sense, obviously, but I had spent my teenage years in particular, but probably even before that, as a kid in Melbourne, who was in a football family. Like you just grow up wanting to be a football player, and maybe mid-teens, that became something I'm like, oh, I can actually do that. And then it became my entire identity. And I happened to end up being drafted to the team that I rooted for in American parlance, but barracked for in Australia.
And that's big.
And so I was just like, all my life had just worked out like a fairy tale, and then it didn't. And as you described, a lot of injuries. I had a surgery every year for about 6 or 7 years, and no playing time, and a few other things that were happening in the background. And so as that happened, I legitimately, looking back now, I'd probably describe it potentially as a breakdown. At the very least, I was not handling things well at all. And so how I felt at the time was, it's over, and I'm a loser. I haven't done what I'm supposed to do. I'm an embarrassment to people, embarrassment to myself. And I was grasping at trying to hang on to that, like still make it happen, even though the odds were getting slimmer and slimmer. I could have been redrafted, and a couple of things almost went that way. But like I said to you earlier, or another time we were talking, I should have just finished then, moved to America, become a punter, lived a college life, started this little journey a bit earlier.
Punter is so funny. It's the only thing that Aussies do.
I actually think, this is a controversial opinion, but given my size and agility, I could have probably played tight end. But regardless, I should have just come over here because I won't say I wasted it. Good years, learned a lot. But I spent so much time trying to resurrect that dead dream, and I couldn't let it go. So I was a mess at that point. I remember the New Year's Eve at the end of that year, after I'd been cut, there were probably 2 instances where I remember bawling my eyes out in public because I'd just lost control of myself. One being the day after 9/11, because that night, the day before, was the day I got told I wasn't going to be in the final squad, which was, they didn't say it, but at the end of my third 1-year contract against the team I was supposed to be matched up against, they weren't putting me in the squad, and so I kind of read the writing on the wall. That means I'm done there. I may not be done, but I'm done there. And so I was hurt. I went out, got drunk, saw the towers getting hit at a nightclub in Melbourne while I was still very drunk, and I was kind of like, oh, whatever. And then I went to work the next day, and I was like, oh, that's, puts things into perspective. But the night before, I was a mess. And then at the end of that year, New Year's Eve, I'd moved on to training for someone else, and I was still trying to keep my ego afloat, keep the dream alive. But it all came crashing down during New Year's Eve when I realised that my life wasn't where I thought it was going to be 5 years before that. And, it was too much for me.
Mm. And then what happened?
And then what happened? I was going to say there was more to the question, but I got caught up in you dumping me in 2001.
So the question was, tell us about that period of your life and how it set the stage for the successes to follow.
Well,
it's not all depressing. That's the point.
Well, no, I mean, it kind of was at the time.
Now it isn't.
Yeah, now it's not. And I think, as you said, the question says how it set the stage. Another thing was happening in the background of that last year that I was at Richmond. I had another massive injury, and then I think all within the space of a week or two, and this is easily the more serious thing. Like my football career, it was devastating, but somewhere in there, and I can't place the dates, but somewhere in there, my father's sister, my godmother, who I grew up around the corner from, we spent a lot of time with them growing up, took her own life, and it was, I obviously felt horrible about it, and I felt very, very horrible for my dad. But I also was like, no, I got to battle on. I got to keep going. Like, got to handle this. And so I never really processed that loss for a little while. And I think all of that combined, because I went through some tough stuff that I didn't know how to handle, and I wasn't a good communicator. I didn't really have the skills or had been taught how to process that stuff. Plus my auntie taking her own life led me to get involved in mental health work, which led me into psychology, which I'd already kind of dabbled in from a performance point of view, because I found it, A, I needed it, and B, it helped me. And so that kind of set the stage for eventually I would make my way back around to being an AFL development coach. Mm-hmm. And in that position, I was like, I got to get my head around psychology. I got to get better at that. So I came here to study it. And then that's when the crazy shit started to happen. Crazy good shit, not crazy bad shit.
Mm. So with that in mind, what lessons can you impart from that period of your life now?
I think one that I mentioned before around, I think a couple that I mentioned before. One, worrying less about what people think, because I was quite caught up in that at that time. That was my identity, and if I'm not a football player, who am I? That was self-inflicted. I had built myself up like that, but being able to let that go earlier would have been good. Two, knowing that it doesn't turn out how you think it's going to turn out. It's not going to be as bad as you think. It's not going to be as good as you think. But being able to sit in that space and be like, all right, this isn't going how I wanted it to, but let's just let the world move me to where I'm supposed to go, or where I'm going to have another opportunity or better opportunities. And then ultimately, that we don't really know how things are going to go. I was very blessed as a young man growing up in a stable household, suburban Melbourne. Could never complain about. I mean, I did complain, but in reality, nothing to complain about compared to the rest of the 90% of the world who grow up in worse conditions. 95 maybe, 98, who knows?
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. And more to the point that no matter how hard you try, sometimes luck doesn't work. Sometimes it's not supposed to go that way. And turns out things went better. Yeah. Like, no, I had no idea at that time that I was going to work with those names you mispronounced before.
I was hoping we'd be able to cut that out. Now we can't.
but I was hoping, back at that time, I didn't know that I'd going to work with those names you mentioned before. But I did, I got eventually to a point where I was like, oh, this thing's here, I'll just do it and see what happens. Which I think is a strength of mine now, where I'm like, okay, let's try that out. Let's see what's the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
And I've ended up in stupid places that I probably at times didn't belong, but I got an opportunity because I said yes, and then I was able to either fake my way through it or I actually belonged there, and I was able to crush it better than people might have thought, including me.
Yeah. So you surprised yourself.
I've definitely surprised myself a few times, in good ways and bad ways.
Okay. What's a good way?
Good way. I think I've always kind of, when I'm in a team situation, which I'm not in anymore, I'm never on staff anymore, like all day, every day with the team. But when I started out in those roles, I had pretty strong opinions about how things should be run, partly probably informed by when you've been a player, you kind of understand a bit more of like what that person needs rather than just theoretically what I've read in a book. And so oftentimes I would be giving feedback to other staff members who might be a bit more senior than me, but I'm just like, you might want to do it different because the guy's not going to receive it well. And then I surprised myself by actually potentially proving myself right in that the final full team roles that I had before I moved on from that life and just went into consultancy mode, or gun for hire mode, I guess, freelancer, was I ran the Australian national soccer teams, men's and women's, took them both to World Cups, and both teams performed better than ever with rosters that weren't rated at the level that we performed at. So the men ranked 38 maybe, and we ended up in the final 16. I think we finished 11th, which is huge for Australia. The women made the final 4 when we were ranked 12 going in. And I surprised myself by finally got to put my theories to the test where I was the boss of these environments. And I was pleasantly surprised that it actually, if you look after people and do things for the right reason, it ends up working out okay.
Okay, so now, thank you for sharing all of that. Have a Tim Tam.
This is my binky. Now that you've dealt with the depressive episode,
Have a Tim Tam.
give yourself some sugar.
So, you have taken the challenges in your life. They've become stepping stones to be able to understand humans at a deeper level, integrated into your sport expertise, and now you run a consulting business called Toughness. Is that correct?
Excuse me. I've got 2 LLCs, S Corps, if you know the jargon in America. One is Toughness, which is focused mostly on coaching. The other one is Steinfort's Advisory Services, which are more corporate level, strategic planning, leadership development, larger scale projects. Toughness is very much one-on-one stuff.
Got it. So for somebody listening that has, trying to find a different direction, and you don't have to share this, but what has been one of the biggest deals you've made financially after all of this in this space that might give some context to why this is such a big deal?
Well, I haven't actually signed the contract yet, but last week we agreed on a deal with Penguin Random House Publishing for a book deal. That is easily the biggest single contract that I've signed. It is going to be north of 7 figures. It's going to be 7 figures, sorry. Okay. Not 8 figures.
North of 6 figures.
Yeah. There you go. North of 6 figures, yes.
Okay.
And that came partly again because I just said yes to something when someone asked me.
What did they ask you?
Do you want to write a book?
It's generally what you say.
It was just an agent hitting me up on LinkedIn, like a literary agent. Shout out to Gideon and Sydney, who have started their own agency, and look at you're making a mess. And they've been fantastic, but they were like, have you thought about it? And I was like, yeah, I've thought about it, but is it going to be worth my while? They painted a range of what it might fetch. It went well beyond the range they painted me, so huge job by them to actually land that. But yeah, and the book will be obviously partly on some of this stuff we're talking about today in terms of my journey, but more importantly, how the stuff that I've uncovered or connected the dots on in psychology, neuroscience, physiology, can help anyone deal with this sort of shit in their life. So, and the fact that the publishers saw this topic as, they're confident enough to put 7 figures behind it because they believe that it will touch that many people and sell that many books, it's huge. So that's probably puts it into context a little bit. And it was it's either that one or the first time I had a single player contract where I'm just working with one player rather than employed by the team. Because sometimes I'm employed by a team.
Yeah, and they're tight asses.
Yeah, and they're like, we're really getting you for this guy, but can you work with everyone else?
Yeah.
But this time it was very purely and clearly it's just for this one player. And I earned more from that contract than I did in a single year running the Australian soccer teams, as in running all of the staff, all of the players, the whole system. And I earned more doing one player in the NBA than I did all of that. So it kind of started to shift my sights of, you're wasting your time on this team stuff. And it did put into perspective, like my first contract in the AFL, this is how back in the day it was. I was a first round draft pick and my first base salary was, I think, $18,000 or $20,000. Full stop, that's all.
Yep.
Now, match payments on top of that, etc. But that's a pretty long way. It's been a long time, but pretty far removed when I'm landing on individual contracts or the finance guys who reached out to me and dragged me into a different industry, and the pay scale for private equity guys and venture capital is very different.
They'll give you carry.
Right? Yeah, well, no,
you should have offered.
We haven't discussed that. Carry. Yeah. I wasn't au fait enough for the terms.
What's your average return right now? Great. Anything above that we get, I want 15%.
I wasn't smart enough at that point.
You need me on that.
I did, and. But, talking, and I'm sure most people as their career progresses, when you compare your first checks to your checks 30 years later, they're very, very different, right? But particularly coming here, it's been a multiplier. The scale in America available for most work is way different to Australia, but definitely in my field, there is the scale both volume-wise, the number
15x people in the same size demographic, or same size location, right?
and that market is a multiplier as well, because if they're in entertainment or finance or even military, the amount of money that backs that industry because of all the eyeballs or the investment in it means that those 15x individuals are getting paid 15x, and it just means that there's so much more opportunity to make contributions where arguably my contribution to Patrick or Raheem or anyone I've worked with on a team that I've been contracted to might only be 0.5% of their career, right? Maybe not even that. But if Patrick goes on and earns $500 million to $1 billion while he's a professional, it's a pretty decent little chunk of change that I've contributed to there, right? And the delta on that, excuse for talking finance terms, but the contribution to change becomes more significant.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that's the argument for high-end CEO salaries, because 2 or 3 good decisions by a good CEO will they're very consequential decisions, and they can be hundreds of millions and billions of dollars worth of decisions. So if they're taking 5% of that, it's at the end of the world. But it only works when it actually helps, know.
Yeah.
And it's based on performance, or it's like there's a lot of value that's been provided in the past, and you've gotten to a point where it's clear that it's going to be a good investment for the company or whatever. But
and that's actually reflective. Like when I'm doing individual contracts now, so I still have some individual clients in a few of the different pro sports. They're usually now tied to whatever your salary is, or base salary. There'll be a percentage of that we discuss.
Yep.
Because if I pick you up straight out of college, you're earning okay. I'm sorry, you're earning great compared to the average person, right? But you're earning okay.
Into the AFL.
Yeah, exactly. But whatever percent of that, then if I do my job properly for you, your career is going to go quicker and faster and up in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. And when you hit free agency, the margin will be much bigger, and I'll take the same percentage of that. Yeah. So we both win if we do this right.
Yeah. So you knew the carry. You just didn't know to apply it in finance.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, let's talk about these theories that you spoke about, because you spoke about how you've developed some theories. What are they? Let's really dig into this.
There's probably, I haven't really named it or framed it very well until quite recently, part of the
Got to do it for the book
discussion. Yeah. And so I was forced to hone my thinking, sharpen my words a little bit. And what I recognised was that time that I spent studying physical therapy while I was an AFL player was useful purely because it gave me a good understanding of physiology. Mm-hmm. Then I move into psychology, and now I'm very interested in neuroscience. It's almost like the Venn diagram of all three, where a lot of people who are giving psychological advice treat it like the mind is this abstract, ephemeral thing that doesn't exist in your body.
Yep.
Right? It's just this, you have a thought cloud, and so we treat it like the thought cloud. You can just wipe off a whiteboard and put new thoughts up there. But that's not how it fucking works.
Yeah.
We have hormones raging around our body based on threat signals that we perceive both objectively and subjectively. And so it's very hard to control thoughts. It's very hard to suppress emotions. In fact, it's problematic and counterproductive to suppress emotions, definitely in the longer term, but sometimes in the shorter term. Impacts decision-making, impacts response times, all these sorts of things. And once I had, connected the dots of the training that I had done in my 20s and the experiences I had as an athlete myself with, I was trying to tell myself to calm down when it literally wasn't possible and I didn't have to. I could have just been like, all right, you're fucking amped, go and do something with it.
Yeah.
And for me, it was a process of iteration or evolution of the okay, I'm going to try that. And I did it with an athlete. For the most part, things worked. Sometimes they didn't, and I learned. But I pieced together a combined model of those three areas that I'm now calling the EASE pressure framework. And EASE is the acronym in there, where it's emotion, attention, strategy, and execution. Because if you deliver on all four of those things, if you have a good understanding of the principles involved under each of those headings, happy to go deeper.
Yeah.
And you know some solid processes that help you put them into play when you need them, and you instill those practices so you actually develop them as a second nature process rather than, I've got to think about doing this. Then when the pressure hits, you're able to manage, you don't control, but you manage the changes in your system, both physically, psychologically, and neurologically, to maximum effect. So the decrements that happen, and usually it's decrements, it's not like pressure lifts people. We do get honed by pressure. We can harness pressure when you're on a deadline, right? But that's usually because we have no other choice. And so the emotion, attention, strategy, execution framework, EASE framework, is there as a scaffolding really for people to climb through and grab onto when they're feeling a bit lost under pressure.
So let's start with emotion. Let's start with the E.
Yeah. So emotion, the counterintuitive view of emotion, as I said before, I think in part of the intro, is it's not as fucking important as we think. Like, it's very important. I don't want people to think that if you feel sad forever, that's okay, because you'll probably end up killing yourself, and that's not good. But the ability to, in any given moment, understand that I can't change, I feel how I feel, and I can change it. But if I'm also supposed to catch that pass that Patrick Mahomes is throwing to me, what's more important? Do I need to change my feelings, or do I need to get my hands on the ball? Being able to prioritise that, usually under pressure, action is going to be more important than, let's make myself feel a little better.
Okay.
So once that principle is understood, and we can usually, particularly for people who've been in pressure situations or performance situations, which AKA means every human.
Yeah.
When you think back to a time when you didn't feel well, but you still performed well, everyone has one. I can sit with every single professional athlete. I can sit with a CEO for sure, public speaker, nurse, doctor, you name it, podcast host, entrepreneur. You have had a time where you didn't feel good going into an immersion event or a very important thing. You didn't feel right, but you still crushed it. True or false?
I don't know. I was reading, you know what's funny? I was reading about you and the work you do, and I was like, fuck, I'm weak. That's the conclusion I came to. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think I'm the best judge.
No, but tell me, like, truly, I'm talking about, have you ever been nervous about asking a girl out and you still asked her and she said yes?
Yeah, well, actually, I got a funny story where, like, I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, and in the book he says, go out of your way, go to a shopping mall and just start talking to girls, and you don't care about the outcome, just like you want to get the rejection out of your system. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. After an event, I went to a club and I was like, I'm going to do this. First girl. We went home together and ended up seeing each other for months. And I was like, well, that didn't work.
There you go. Well, see, but it's a great example of, I'm sure the first girl, you would have been like, there's a little bit, fuck, this is a bit stupid what I'm doing here, right? Heart rate's up. There's a little bit of unknown. And that's a great example of your emotions at that time. They were telling you the right things, like this could make you look stupid, but it also, you'd never know until you ask the question. Yeah. And so once you're able to understand that emotion and outcome aren't as linked as we think. I can't positively manifest $1 million outside this door, no matter how fucking hard I dream.
Yeah.
So we can't influence things with our mind as much as we think.
Yeah.
And our emotions don't dictate how we perform unless we let them. Unless I believe that my emotions are that important, then they will get in the fucking way. And so it's actually reverse engineering what we've been taught about positive thinking and saying, to be honest, your feelings don't fucking matter in the moment.
Well, let's talk about when the feelings do matter. When do you appropriately process emotions?
It's absolutely vital. So I talk about it a little bit like running a marathon, lifting weights, like doing a workout where it fucking hurts. It fucking hurts.
Have you ran a marathon?
Never, and I never will.
I've done one. That was the worst thing I've ever done.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not that dumb.
But I've done it.
Yeah,
and I would say for the rest of my life that I've done it.
Well done.
And I fucking hated myself for it.
So you're telling me you're not tough and you fucking beat me on that one easily. I'm not going near that shit. I ran too much for a living while I was playing footy and I fucking hated it. I remember finishing and being like, I'm going to go on a run because I'm used to going for runs. And then I started running. I'm like, why the fuck am I doing this? This hurts. This is not fun.
Yeah.
I don't understand people who say fun run. Those two words don't go together.
I've been sprinting a lot lately. That's been great. Yeah. You bang it out in half an hour.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
And it's just like you go and pedal to the metal and you just feel like $1 million afterwards.
Yeah, I don't mind that. The long, steady, like anything over, to be quite honest for me these days, anything over a mile, I'm in trouble. But using back to the analogy, when you work out, whether it's running, lifting weights, moving furniture, whatever, right? Your body produces things while it's happening that hurts. Yeah. You have lactic acid, your lungs are burning, like your legs are getting jelly. These are not good feelings, but you can push through them because you're doing something that requires you to do that. Then afterwards, you should absolutely do recovery sessions that allow you to clear the lactic out, go to some cold plunges, do some stretches, put some compression on. Like there are things that help get rid of that waste. These are products of exertion.
Yeah.
Emotions are product of experience. And so when you can actually sit there and be like, okay, I am feeling this, but I'm going to finish the job. And then afterwards, you don't pretend it never happened. You're like, yeah, I've got a lot of emotional lactic acid now. So let's go and do a cold plunge. Let's go watch a movie I like. Let's eat some ice cream. Let's have sex. Let's do things that feel good and allow you to express and recalibrate your system. And there are some proven exercises that have a bunch of valid evidence, empirical evidence, that if you do X, you will absolutely move on from some of the emotions that are sitting on your system like lactic acid.
What are they?
There's a great body of work from James Pennebaker out of the University of Texas. He's done a bunch of work on how words impact us and how words reveal what we're actually feeling or thinking. Just like if you're a nerd and you're a word nerd, go read his shit. You'll never be the same afterwards. I think there's a book he wrote called The Secret Life of Pronouns, which is highly recommended as a word nerd. It's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now. It's really about reading. It's actually about large language models before they were cool.
Right.
But another lesser known part of his work was an emotional expression exercise. And it's very, very simple. And I did this myself when I was like going through something and I'd heard about it. So I went and actually did the exercise and it was profound. Mm-hmm. Like I legitimately was like I'd dropped acid or smoked weed or like, I'll get to that in a sec. But the process is you write for 20 minutes nonstop, 4 days in a row, if you can. If not, do them as close together as possible.
Yeah.
And each day the prompt is really relatively vague and just generally say, write about a traumatic event or an emotional upheaval or something that's been troubling you for 20 minutes. Write whatever comes to mind and write it as if no one else is going to read it. Just brain vomit.
Yeah.
Express everything that's on your heart, your mind, whatever. And it takes a little while to get into it unless you're really amped or primed or, busting at the seams. But by day 2, especially by day 3, I remember sitting in day 3 about 10 minutes in, and I wrote something just because it was flowing out of me, and I wrote something, and I pressed like full stop on the sentence, and it was like, you know, the Dolby surround sound thing that happens at the start of movies. It was like, that was what it felt like. Like it was just phenomenal, because it was a light bulb realization about myself that I hadn't had and wouldn't have had if I didn't continue to express what had been sitting there for quite some time. And so I now, I won't say overprescribe, but I'm very happy prescribing this exercise to any of my clients and any of your listeners who have dealt with something emotionally that they either didn't process at the time through choice or necessity, or are struggling to understand why they just feel weird. They can't actually, I either feel numb, I feel off, or like there's just something there, right? And then it might be there for a week, or it might have been there for 6 months.
Or longer, sometimes years.
Absolutely. And everyone I give it to a man/woman, has an experience similar to what I describe somewhere in the 4 days, where they're like, holy shit, I can't believe I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
And that comes because they express their emotions willingly and without restriction, without worrying what people will think if I say I felt this about that situation. I felt weak. I felt nude. I felt conflicted. I felt whatever it is. Like, just be honest with how you felt, because then once it's on the table, you can actually sort through, oh, that emotion's no good for me. Shit, that one's turned up 7 times. Probably got to look into that. And it becomes, I won't say it's like self-therapy, but it's
It is like self-therapy.
Yeah,
exactly what it is.
Yeah, well, I think there's dangers to telling people they can self-therapize themselves, because it can end up, if you know, here's a good disclaimer, right?
Spiraling.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'll come back to my auntie again. Like, there were other things going on for her in her life at that stage, but if you're in that bad a space and you let your emotions go and you start talking to yourself with whatever comes to your mind, that's not a good place to be.
Okay.
And there's actually almost a eject button within the exercise that Pennebaker built in, that is the flip out rule. If you're writing about anything and at any stage during the writing you feel like you're about to flip out, you put the pen down, you stop immediately, and you don't come back to it. That's the end of it. You're not allowed to touch it. You've got to go see a pro.
Okay.
And it's very important to recognize that. Like, if you're getting to a point, same as if you were working out, right? I'm lifting 100 and whatever. It's been a long time since I've pressed anything. And I feel like my hamstring's about to rip off, or I actually feel something pop in my back. You don't keep lifting.
No.
You stop, you put it down, you go see a pro.
Have you heard of morning pages?
No.
So basically the idea of morning pages is something that I do as well, on and off, because it's quite time consuming. But Julia Cameron, she wrote a book about the artists, like it's called The Artist's Way. Uh-huh. And she has this thing where you wake up first thing in the morning and you do 3 pages of freehand, just mind dumping, whatever comes up. And the process of that just like clarifies your thinking. You don't have to think about it. You never look at it again. It sounds quite similar. And it's, I've done it on and off over my life, and I've heard a lot of stories of people that do it, and it has a massive impact. So I think they're quite similar, but maybe yours is a little bit honed in.
This one has specific context, because I even found myself, a lot of traditional psychology would be about journaling and about talking about your feelings and all this sort of shit. Great, that's fine, and some of it works. But I found it hard to write without direction and or with restriction. So almost the opposite of each other, right? If there was too much restriction, as in you've got to make it look right because someone's going to see it, it's a waste of time.
Yep.
If there's no direction, I'll just talk about what that velour wall looks like. That's fantastic. Well, that's useless as well. And so I think some direction, and particularly with the people I tend to work with, it's usually about, the reason I came to it was because Pennebaker's work was about dealing with trauma. But the clientele that I normally deal with, people who are trying to perform and they're under intense pressure, so they can accumulate a lot of emotion that isn't expressed, which causes them to behave in poor ways or not think clearly or move slow or move too quick, is that they're able to deal with not necessarily trauma, but emotional upheaval or emotional accrual by expressing it, getting it out, and then choosing what is worth attending to and what is just noise, and off they go. And so I think some focus is helpful, but that's really just in terms of the people I work with.
Makes sense. Attention.
So this is the one that I used to say a couple of things to athletes as I was trying to describe how mindfulness actually works. Because we think about mindfulness as empty your mind, right? Be a Buddhist monk, think nothing. And that's what, if I ask you about the best pitch you've ever done when you're trying to get an investor into a business, or the best show you've ever done, usually people will describe it as, I wasn't thinking anything. I just fucking went in flow state, right? And that's true to an extent, because when we think about what we're thinking, we're usually doing it in retrospect. We're not thinking about what we're thinking right now. And secondly, memory is encoded by emotion. So we're very clear when we were thinking about emotional things, we remember the fuck out of that. I'm very scared. I'm very excited. She's hot as hell. He's an asshole. I remember these things, right? Yeah. But if I'm sitting there and all I'm thinking about is, what pitch is he going to throw? What area of the zone is it going to be in? How do I want to hit that? What's the count? All right, back foot, go. And then that play finishes and I move to the next one without any emotion. I am thinking stuff, I just don't remember it. So it feels like I'm empty. But my mind is full. It's just full of what I'm doing. So that's really, like, I flip it a little bit in time, talking about mindfulness as it's not empty. Your mind should be full. And it should be full of one thing, which is just this thing that you're doing right now. That's flow. Okay. That's absolute, that's bliss for most people. That's a great lovemaking session. All you're thinking about is how good this feels and how long can it last. Right? And
the more you think about how good it feels, the less it lasts.
Exactly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But that is bliss because you're so in the moment, nothing else exists.
Yeah. You
forget what room you're in. You forget what is on the calendar. You forget what happened during the earlier hours of the day. Just this thing that's happening right now. To me, that's pure happiness.
Yeah.
And so when I'm trying to describe this to people who are athletes and who are naturally tuned into their body, I started leaning on some neuroscience that has found repeatedly in thousands of studies, our brains are designed with clear limitations. We cannot attend to everything that's happening around us. There is so much stimulation. Think about, even in this room right now, we've got the cameras, the lights, the cords, the whatever you call that, the monitor. You've got this beautiful glass display beside you. We've got the Tim Tams on the table. Your coffee's sitting down there. And then there's all the things outside this room, both physically and later today, what's on the calendar, what happened earlier today, what's happening in the next room. There's trillions of things. But at any given time, right now, you can only have between 3 and 5 things, 4 and 6, depending on the study you read, in your conscious awareness at one time. This is your working memory. Mm-hmm. It's actually in a very specific area of the brain. And it's activated when you're concentrating on memory, recall, or attention on a certain object or a certain thing. And so right now, as an example, you're hearing my voice, you're seeing my face and watching me touch my fingers, you're nodding because you're like, I think he's right, but let's go along with this. You may also be thinking about your next question or where this is leading. But while all that's happening, you're not thinking about your left foot. And now that I've mentioned your left foot, you are. And one of the other things is bumped out. Right?
Where are we?
Yeah, right. And so and every time I do that with someone, and the first time I really recognised how powerful this was, I started noticing that when I did that little spiel with an athlete, they really locked in. They're like, oh, fuck, that's true. I am thinking about my left foot. And I have forgotten about how much coach is an asshole. But now I'm back on coach. Yeah. And now I've forgotten about practice. Like, there's only so many things you can have.
Yeah.
Once you realise that, it becomes a strength, not a weakness. Because I can design my attention set to deliberately hone in onto things that are helpful right now, whether it's what I do or what I pay attention to, and deliberately recognise if I ever end up with thoughts or feelings in my attention because they're not helpful right now.
Yeah.
So if I notice that, then just turn my attention back to what I know works.
Yeah.
When I tell that to an athlete, they'd really switch on, but it really, really hit home when Patrick Mahomes mentions my name in an interview just prior to his second Super Bowl win, when someone said, how did you learn to focus and deal with pressure? And he mentioned the work we did in college, and that specifically this one exercise, he used to talk about this thing, that you can only have a certain amount of things on your mind, and I still use it to this day. And I was like, okay, it's probably something I should talk about a bit more.
So what's the practical application of this?
Is the development of, so the strategy execution stuff, it all kind of starts to blend in, but particularly with the attention set is knowing that principle is one thing, and then pre-designing so that you actively can tune your attention on command. Mm-hmm. And that's probably more of a practice thing than I can give you one thing right now to do.
So how do you practice it?
It's mindfulness meditation work, effectively.
Okay.
Because but a very specific type. Because some people will do transcendental meditation, great stuff, awesome, knock yourself out, it's very good for you.
Yeah.
But in terms of developing attention, I prefer to talk about it as an attention session where what we're deliberately doing is how many things can I pay attention to in my visual system and ignore everything else. So I get very good at tuning into that channel, right? And then how many can I do audio? How many can I do kinesthetic? How many can I do in my imagination? Like I've got to be able to, if I want to, turn my attention where I want it to go.
Yep.
And this is a practice thing in the same as if I learn to run a certain pattern, the more often I do it, the more likely it is that I fire that way again. And so practicing mindfulness meditation, it has so many benefits, but one of them is that you can become more adept at managing your attention. I won't ever use the word control because you cannot control your attention. If I do this, your editor's going to hate me, but also you can't not hear that.
Yeah.
You can't not pay attention to it.
Yep.
I wished it was louder. I thought it was going to be more loud. Because normally I'll clap and I'll be like, you can't stop being scared from that. You can't, if a bomb went off in the next room, I don't care how good you are at meditating, your attention will go to that thing, right? So you can't control it 100%. It's like a dog. I just bought a puppy this year. It's been a good teacher for me. Because sometimes I think I can control him and then I realize no, but for the most part I can manage him, right? And so being able to work on your attention is like that. You become more adept at managing it, particularly under stress. If you've trained those neural pathways, they're more likely to repeat.
That makes sense. So focusing attention, 4 to 6 things maximum at any one time, using mindfulness techniques to build that muscle. Mm-hmm. So that's the A part, attention part. So strategy. And
strategy, this is where it starts to become linked, really, is that knowing the emotion thing and knowing the attention thing, practicing the attention thing in particular, is good. But being able to do that with the right effect in the right direction is really dependent on you knowing what you are trying to achieve, what can usually knock it off track, and in that case, what do I actually want my attention to go back to? My strategy is, and I'll use an example that I'm doing with a Major League Baseball player in his off-season at the moment. He's talking about off-field distractions being an issue, particularly as he gets tired, because the thing that you want to do when you're tired is, getting tired means you feel more anxious. Feeling more anxious, you want the anxiety to go away, so you go and do things that make you feel good, but they end up making you more tired. And so the cycle repeats.
Negative cycle, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so being able to actually say, all right, what do you actually need to do here? Not what do you want to do? Because if you let yourself decide in the moment, you'll decide what actually feels good instead of what is good, which usually isn't the first thing that you'll run to. And so being able to set a strategy in advance means that if I don't want to have to think in the moment, or I don't want to rely on my thinking in the moment because it is unreliable when I'm tired, then I need to do my thinking in advance.
Sure.
Which is setting strategies for when I'm tired, and if I haven't performed well and I'm on the road, I need to know the first thing I do when I get to my hotel is this, this, and this.
Yeah. So what's an example of that?
Either calling your mum, getting onto Pro Tools, do some DJing, like something that will absorb you, but not in a way that other things might absorb you while you're on the road.
Yeah.
Being able to step into the box in a 2-strike count. It's what they call a high leverage situation in baseball. And this player has actually been very, very good in these situations. But he fell in a hole later in the season because he was starting to chase numbers. I need to hit that home run number because contract-wise, that's a big deal. Great. It's good to have goals, but when you're standing in the box and it's an 0-2 count and there's runners on base and there's all these things going on, you're chasing that home run number. Doesn't mean shit. You just need to hit the ball right now. Mm-hmm. And so being able to know that in that situation, here's my strategy. I focus on this and this. So I'm looking for what pitch he's given me. I want it to be down here. And an early cue that I get on that is how he tips his glove, whatever it might be. And then I know that as he loads up, I tend to put weight on my back foot. I make sure I cock my bat. And when the balls were there to be hit, I pull the trigger. And so those are all very in-the-moment things that have nothing to do, well, they definitely have a lot to do with hitting home runs, but it's not about hitting the home run. It's just if you do that often enough, well enough, and it's something that no one else can stop you doing, they should become non-negotiables, right? And that's really where you end up with the strategy, is setting non-negotiables for yourself that become your go-to under pressure.
So it's reminded me of like Trust the Process, that's the 76ers, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Just focusing on what's right in front of you and the task at hand, as opposed to the bigger picture.
Yes, and it's a good catchphrase for it. The more active version of that, because trust the process can mean passive. It can invoke passivity, right?
Sure.
I'm going to be like, oh, the world's got me. God's got me.
Yeah.
Right? But I need to actually attack that ball.
Yeah.
I need to tackle that man. I need to make that phone call. I need to do this thing.
Yeah.
Right? And so talking about it as trust the process is one way to look at it. How I prefer to frame it when I'm working with people is setting those things that I said before as, when I'm in this situation and I can get in my own way, I know that if I do X, Y, and Z, then those are the things that give me the best chance of getting the outcome I want. And I know that no one can stop me doing that.
Yeah.
Right? So basketball example, I know that if I'm trying to get on the low post, if I'm as soon as I get to the block, I make contact first. I establish position, I get down, and I get my arm out and make space. If I do those three things, there's more likelihood of me getting the ball than if I don't do those things.
Yeah.
And no one can stop me doing that unless the guy's hitting me at the top of the key. So when I'm able to actually say that no one can stop me doing it and they make me better, why the fuck would I ever not do them? It's only happening because I'm getting my own way.
Or you don't know the techniques, the fundamental techniques.
There you go. And so what it becomes is scaffolding again to be able to say, did I do that or not? Yes or no? If the answer is no, why not? Because I don't know the techniques. All right, well, let's go learn the fucking techniques.
Yeah.
Or is it because the ref was calling a lot of holding fouls? Cool. Is the ref going to call a lot of fouls again in the future? Has that happened before, and will it happen again? Yes. Well, then what are you going to do next time that happens? Because you can't afford to have the ref stop you doing this thing. And so it becomes a process then of just meticulously, steadily, relentlessly pulling out each obstacle that stops you doing the thing, saying, well, next time that happens, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Gone. Not an obstacle anymore. Next time that happens, gone. And eventually nothing gets in the way of you delivering this basis for performance, which is, if I do those things, I'm generally going to be okay.
Yeah,
usually leads to consistency, which usually leads to improvement.
So basically building systems around the challenges.
Yes.
Got it. And then execution is that.
Well, I think the execution is, so that strategy that I just described there is probably twofold. We almost went into the execution while we were talking. Strategy is setting the plan. Execution is doing and reviewing. Like I go out there tonight, tip-off's at 7:30 p.m, Madison Square Garden, awesome. And as I get ready, I've got to get ready and focus on, that's my execution goal, not scoring 30 points. 30 might come if I do that correctly, but I've just got to go and do these things. And if I execute, good. And then being able to consistently get better at delivering that as an execution is, how many times out of 10, I had 10 opportunities to do it. Did I do it all 10? Perfect. Do it again. But if not, okay, let's find those obstacles. What got in your way here? How do we get better at it? And so it becomes a plan, act, review, almost a cycle of do, review, and that's when you drop into the zone from a work point of view, because it feels a bit robotic, but if you're doing it well, it actually feels really cool.
Yeah, well, hopefully you internalize the ideas and information, and then it just becomes again part of the flow state, and we tend to be happiest in the flow state, so they go hand in hand.
100%.
Yeah. So with all this in mind and the work you've done with some very high-end people, what in your mind makes a superstar? Consistency.
Like, and in particular when we're talking about this sort of stuff, most people who make it to the NBA can do shit that you and I can't dream of doing, but they don't do it every night. And a superstar is someone who does it every night, and that includes nights when they feel sick. It includes nights when they're getting double-teamed. It includes nights when they've been on a back-to-back and they're on the road for 10 days. And it includes nights when it's do or die, game 7, win or go home. A superstar produces in all of the contexts, is consistent with what they produce, and does it at a level higher than most people. I probably said them in the wrong order, but they're the three things that stand out to me.
Okay. And how can a superstar also be a team player?
Well, number one, they have to continue being a superstar. Like it was one of the first things that I worked on I kind of snuck psychology in the back door when I was head of development at the Adelaide Crows in the AFL. I knew psychology was important to some of these people. I knew that they probably wouldn't swallow it straight up because they're like, I'm pretty fucking good. Why do I need that? And so instead of fronting it as you need psychology, it was like, hey, you're going to be a leader of this team. But in order to lead, you got to keep, you've been performing here, you got to keep yourself there. Otherwise, no one's going to listen to you if you start playing like shit. So let's talk about the consistency, the psychology of consistency, because that way you'll be a better leader. More people will follow you if you stay at this level. So number one, for a superstar to be a good team player, they've got to keep doing their thing. Keep being a superstar. Number two is understanding and probably even expressing that they can't win it themselves. Like even Tom Brady isn't going to get it done if the rest of his team aren't doing their jobs, right? You can be a superstar all you want, but if your teammates can't bring it, then you ain't winning shit. And number three is probably then flowing on from that, I would say their ability to own when they haven't been a superstar or they haven't executed at the level that they wanted or they just flat out did the wrong thing. Being able to own that and express it and say it in front of others means that they're more likely to be able to improve. Because if they see the superstar being hard on himself and honest and working to get better, even in the little things or even in the one mistake out of 20 great plays, then they're not going to question whether they should be doing that. So it will improve the team by yourself being humble and hardworking because other people will follow that lead.
So how would they know when to balance between, I guess, the unrelenting, maybe ego is not the right word, but unrelenting self-belief that they are going to win and be right, because I think that's necessary to be a champion, but also to be able to curb that when it's not the right time to use that as, use that tool. It's kind of all or nothing with these people a lot of the times.
Yeah, I experienced it for the most part. I think it's experience. Like,
okay,
because sometimes we don't know if they're right. They don't know if they're right. But I'd rather trust in that than let's draw up a fancy play to prove that they aren't the person. Like, why the fuck would you do that? And that probably hit home for me most when I was in the NBA, because there's a commonly held view amongst the staff. It's not really, I haven't heard it communicated in TV, but amongst the staff, we were going into Toronto, we were going in as underdogs. We shouldn't have probably gone past 4 or 5 games. Excuse me.
And Kawhi Leonard's Toronto?
Mm-hmm, yep.
Good team.
They won it. And we got within a rim bounce of getting past them. But going into that series, I was pretty gung-ho about how we were going. We were coming right at the right time. We'd just gotten Jimmy Butler. That's its own story in itself. But we were finally getting some sort of cohesion. And usually what happens at the pro level particularly is when it gets to playoffs, egos start to get put to the side because we just got to fucking win. Like, it's not about, by then it's not contracts, because you get massive bonuses just for progressing one round in the playoffs.
Got it.
So everyone's locked into just what do we got to do to win? Got it. He's carrying the ball up, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
And so we were really finding a groove. And I said that to one of the other staff, and they were like, yeah, I appreciate your positivity, but here's how it goes. Usually at the end of an NBA game, whoever has the best player on the floor will win if it's close enough.
Yeah.
And so, it actually ended up coming true, unfortunately for us, in Game 7. Kawhi drops that shot, bounces on the rim 100 times, and we all walk off kind of shaking our heads like, did that really happen? But, with the superstar on your team, the odds are better for you to give it to that, unless you know that they're running a specific defense that is going to, negate that influence. You're much better saying, well, he's the best player here. Let's see if he can do it. And empowering that, some people might call it arrogance, ego, whatever it is. But if this person truly believes, and they're not often going to believe it if they haven't actually done it already a few times, off you go, kid. Do it again.
Yeah. Okay. Just quickly though, I love doing this podcast. If it's positively impacted you in some way and you would like to support us, please subscribe. By subscribing, it allows us to build a much bigger base of listeners, which results in better guests, better production, and a better show overall. Alternatively, please take a look at the affiliate links of the products that I use and love in the comments below and consider purchasing using those links. They'll give you a discount and they'll also provide the podcast a small kickback. These are two very easy ways for you to support us as we continue to grow the podcast that we absolutely love doing. Thank you for your support, and now back to the episode. So I like the idea of action over emotion. You spoke about this previously. It seems like a core component of the work you do.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that in some more detail with some hard examples and the positive outcomes you've seen.
Okay, so right now I'm scared that there's some dangerous criminals out here yelling at us. I don't know if you heard that on the microphone, but in the background someone's yelled out. I couldn't hear it through the headphones. But I could be scared about that, right? Now, I can focus on my fear, and I can also focus on all the imaginary scenarios of whatever the hell's going on out there.
Yeah.
Or I can lock in and answer your question. And for the most part, because I'm a white man living in America, I can generally, it's going to work out okay. But that's a silly example. I'll use some real life examples and some probably more severe ones than just hitting or missing a winning shot. Again, one of the more surreal experiences, I'm standing in open heart surgery. So thankfully, because I'm standing, I'm not the one who's getting surgeoned. But I get to watch the Cleveland Heart Clinic use a chainsaw to open up a guy's chest. They crack his ribs open. I don't know exactly how they do it, but they put some bypass leads into his chest, or they basically replace the valves with plastic that takes the blood into a dialysis machine, and they effectively turn this human off, and this machine runs his heart for a while. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, it's a religious experience. I swear to God, the first 10 minutes, it's kind of, they're just bopping out. They got music on. They're sawing this guy open. They're just doing regular everyday shit.
It's like a horror movie.
You and me cut film for a living, and these guys cut humans. It is what it is. They got music on in the back. They're drinking a coffee. All right, knock yourself out. Anyway, and then it gets serious because they put the dialysis on, and long as that goes and his blood pressure stays up, but it starts to get a little real. And that's when I realised this human is effectively dead, but they're keeping him alive, and they've got a clock running from the moment that he goes on dialysis, and the clock starts. And then they start to replace the valves in his heart because he's doing triple bypass surgery. And I'm watching this just like in awe, and I'm legitimately having a religious experience because I'm like, how is this even possible? Like, I don't believe in God, Yahweh, Allah, whatever. Like, I'm sure there's something, but I don't think we can grasp it. But I'm sitting there at that moment going, whatever it is, bravo, that you've developed us to be able to do this to ourselves. Fucking crazy.
Yeah.
So I watch this happen, and I'm just caught up in the moment. And at about I think it's about 30 or 40 minutes, the clock's running. They're like, okay, cool, we're done here. Let's get him back off dialysis. We'll stitch him up, and then off we go. I don't know if the stitching happened before I guess it has to happen beforehand. Anyway, the order is not relevant. It's more about the fact that as they bring him off dialysis and they bring him back to, okay, now he's controlling his own body again, his blood pressure doesn't come up. And the joviality that had basically been present the whole time, they're talking about their kids and what's happening at school, and did you see Cleveland win the other night? Like, it's just a regular day at the office for them, cutting open another human. And then it becomes a not regular day at the office because this person's blood pressure doesn't come up. And all of a sudden people get quiet, the radio gets turned off, don't know who did it, but someone knew to do it. And the anaesthetist is at bat. It is his job to save this human now. Everything else is irrelevant. And you can see he's becoming visually affected by, he knows he's the man, and if something goes wrong here, it's on him. And at that time, he could be, he's been well trained, right? So it's not like, I would think that he's relatively on autopilot at this point, but this is not a normal surgery. And at that point, he could go into barking at a nurse who talks over the top of him, which happened. He didn't bark, though. He just tugged a tight leash. And he could go quickly through his checklist, but he was methodical. And he had actions that were clearly A, defined, and B, trained so that he just went through them trusting that process and being very clear that if I do these things, I'm giving this human the best chance to live, rather than panic stations. This isn't going how it should be. My emotions are telling me to fucking do something special, but in reality, you shouldn't do something special. Do what you know you should do. And that is probably the most life or death example I can give that I've seen from 2 meters away, where I was affected by what's going on. I'm like, fuck, I might see a man die here. This is not nice. I didn't come for this. I didn't pay for this ticket. But the person who was at the center of it was likely feeling some shit too, but went about their business methodically, and thankfully Joe Smith or whoever the patient was lived to see another day. Got through it. They got him up. Everyone clapped their hands. Music went back on. Stitched him up. Out he goes. Bring the next patient in. Fucking phenomenal.
That's crazy. So, I mean, what I'm hearing there is you need to have the systems in place prior to, because if you don't, you're cooked.
Yeah, you're more likely to be cooked. Sometimes you can pull one out your ass or rabbit out the hat if you want. And you know, that's part of what talented people do, is they have an innate sense of, if I do this, maybe this answers the question. But oftentimes, to the examples I gave before, where if the referee is the problem that's stopping you, has that happened before? Yes. Will it happen again? Yes. Why do you not have a system in place for dealing with a bad referee? Weather, bus being late, all these things that can go wrong. And the best examples of how this is done well are military, or, you know, usually when life or death's involved. Because if you fuck up and someone dies, it's a little more critical than, oh, our bus broke down and we only had 10 minutes to warm up and so we played like shit.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen that often. But surely you've got a plan to handle that, right?
Yeah.
And good teams at least have individuals on there who can take control in those moments, and they're like, hey, here's what we're going to do. Everyone just follow me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So with the action over emotion principles, how there's a fine line that I'm noticing around this, where you take action and maybe you are constantly taking action, and then you end up with a burnout because you've taken too much action for too long. So how do you focus on action over emotion while also dealing with the stresses, preventing burnout, while also maintaining performance?
Great question. And that is the constant and never-ending chase of my work with individuals particularly, is that by necessity what they're doing requires that extreme level of preparation, recovery, attention to detail, in order to compete with the best in the world, or to produce the best of what they've got. And they're wired such that that's never going to be something you take away from them. They would be unhappy if they weren't doing that thing or something similar.
Yeah.
This is their church that they've chosen to pray at for their immediate future. And so rather than trying to tell people to get work-life balance, which is not actually possible if you're trying to do something that changes the world, like, you know, Elon Musk is not going to have a normal life.
No. He's got like 12 kids, so
it's very abnormal in many ways.
He's a strange man.
A strange dude. But he's also done some things that none of us could imagine.
You have to be a little bit strange. You have to be a lot of bit strange.
Yeah. In order to even get to those places, you're by definition an outlier. But to excel within those spaces, there's a little bit of psychopathy in some of the people I work with, right?
Yeah. That's where it comes back to the conversation around the ego, and you need to be so, I guess, delusionally confident and driven in yourself to perform at that level. But then when I guess you can't turn it off. It's kind of just part of the nature. It's
part and parcel. And I think this is one of the things that, you know, Ryan Holiday, great writer. I disagree with the concept ego is the enemy.
Okay.
Because the ego is an important thing that has produced many brilliant advancements for the human species, for different races within the human species. So many advancements happen or start potentially or finish potentially because one individual is so fucking egotistic that they go, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And everyone else gets dragged along. Now, I'm not saying it's healthy, but I'm not saying it's the enemy either.
Yeah.
It's just part of the picture.
Yeah.
And so this workload thing, work-life balance is it's nice in theory, but
depends on your goals.
Yeah, it depends on your goals. Depends on who you are. Depends on where you find yourself. If you are the leader of a troop, of a SAS troop in Afghanistan, and you're in country, you don't get work-life balance.
Yeah,
you're going to die if you try and take some time off.
Yeah.
And so when you're in season in Major League Baseball, they call it the show for a reason, and it's because it's like the circus. You get on the bus at the start of spring training, and you go back to your family 7 months later.
And you're playing every day almost.
Playing 162 games in 184 days or something stupid. That's only regular season. Then you might go another 2 months in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And once you accept that, it's not great, but it also, it comes with some healthy trade-offs.
Sure.
But in order to maintain performance within that context, there is a delicate balance of we need to keep pushing, but we also need to make sure we survive and get through. And usually those who have been doing it a while have a decent feel for that. I walked into Major League Baseball having not really understanding that concept of the show and being on the road. And I watched them do batting practice the first couple of times. I'm like, what are we fucking doing here? Like, someone's throwing it to you almost underhand and you're smashing it to the wall. Like, that's not practice. That's not how it comes in 100 mile an hour. You're getting it thrown 50 mile an hour. And one of them looks over at me and pats me on the shoulder. He goes, come talk to us in 6 weeks. All right, whatever. So then I travel with them for 6 weeks. It's a cool life for a young fella getting into the game. But by the end of it, I was like, I get it now. I wouldn't want to come out here and get balls thrown at me super speed either, because I'm doing it every day. And eventually this is about warming up rather than getting better.
Yeah.
Right? They almost get a perpetual cycle of you get better by playing, you can't get better by training because you'll burn out.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the principles behind this now for someone who isn't a professional athlete but just a normal person that want to apply these techniques to build up, mental toughness, potentially push to become better or even an elite status when they're not quite there yet?
Yeah, well, it's a good question because these are great stories to hear about. Like, I actually would talk about the ego is the enemy concept, or the fact that some of these people we idolize are incredibly extreme.
Yeah.
Kobe and Michael, two examples that everyone idolizes as for their mentality, but quite honestly were psychopaths.
Yeah.
And may still be in Michael's case, right?
Yeah. You see it in the eyes.
Yeah, you see it in the eyes, but you also see it in the behavior and the way they treat people around them,
yeah.
even people who are helping them. Like, it would not be nice to be in relationships with those people, I guess.
Yeah.
However, they're very good at basketball, so knock themselves out. Great. Yeah. And I think it's one thing to be motivated and inspired by those stories, but it's also not potentially relevant to the father of two who's trying to start his own business, or the mother of one single who is just trying to survive at the office, and both of them are trying to get ready for winter body and they're working out at the gym, right? Michael Jordan's attitude doesn't apply to them, because they have very different demands, and doing and working at the level of psychopathy of a Michael Jordan when he was in his prime is going to be counterproductive for those two individuals, hypothetical avatars that I've just thrown out there.
What are the commonalities that you can take? What are the common lessons from being firsthand in this? Yeah,
well, having seen now the crossover to other high performers that don't live as extreme lives, so working with people in private equity, working with surgeons, who, whilst their lives are a bit different, they're still a little more normal because they go home to their wives every day and they have a regular-ish time schedule, and they're not fated by millions and given way too much money for 20-year-olds. Is that the common things are usually, in terms of the way to apply it, are those four things: being able to recognize and manage emotions, being able to understand, be aware of, and direct their attention, being able to set effective strategies, and being able to execute on those strategies in the moments that matter the most. And that's where the difference is for Michael Jordan, the moments that matter the most are in basketball games, but also in practice and in anything he was doing, he was competing in. So he was always on, right? As a father of two, you probably don't have to compete with your kids, right?
Teach them a fucking lesson.
But when you get home, you need to be you play a different role. I have a colleague, Reb Rebelly, who was also going to be writing a book in the next couple of years, and I can't wait for it. It's called Multitudes, or at least that's the working title right now. He's done a bunch of research. He was Adam Grant's right-hand man. He's done a bunch of research on the fact that our personalities actually change depending on situations, and that's okay. It's actually functional. When I'm at work, I'm this person. When I'm at home, I'm this person. When I'm drinking with my buddies, I'm that person. And that's okay. It's actually very normal. You can't be a psychopath everywhere. It's probably not going to...
It's just problematic.
It's very problematic, right?
Yeah.
So flexibility is important in both personality and in the way we execute those roles. So being able to understand that in the certain situations that I am under pressure or I do need to deal with it, some of which are at work and some of which absolutely are at home. I'm under pressure to get ready for Thanksgiving dinner and my husband's out of town for all the days leading up to it and I don't have a babysitter, and so all of a sudden I'm under more pressure than I would like, right? I need to recognize that I'm feeling shit about that, but don't let that hijack the way I talk to my kid. And I also need to then pay attention to the right things, which is not, oh my God, my phone's blowing up. It's, okay, have I ordered everything I need for the meal? And I need to have a strategy for when that dickhead walks in that I don't like but is one of my husband's good friends. What's my strategy for handling that conversation? Because he's on the other end of the political spectrum and I hate the conversation that's coming.
Yep.
And the execution is, okay, once it starts, I've got to stop thinking about everything else and just be a hostess, right? And they're 4 examples I just made up off the top of my head, but that's a pressure situation that a lot of people are going to face in 2 days in America. And being able to apply those 4 strategies is how you transfer the knowledge that we've got from elite performers into the everyday micro pressure situations, and being able to stay in the moment, be your best self and get whatever outcomes you might want to out of those situations.
Yeah. Okay. That all makes a lot of sense. I'm conscious of time, so I'd love to dig into some more generally philosophical things in your world.
Let's go.
What views do you have that would make most people either scratch their heads or potentially get angry?
Emotions don't matter. I think that would piss some people off. And I've said that in context, right? They do matter a bit, but they matter way less than people make out. And scratch their heads. One is that, particularly like when I went on TV the other day, the brief was very clear. I've got 2 pretty high-profile clients in New York. It's a New York morning breakfast show. And the idea was, let's talk about that, then talk about the fact you work with people in normal life, finance, medicine, in New York as well, and then the fact that we can all use this stuff in our life. I go in there, and they clearly haven't read the brief because they only talk about one of my clients, which is fine. But then they say, and you're here to tell us how positive thinking is the key to handling pressure. I'm like, well, that's actually the opposite of what I fucking say. And so I think for some, that would be quite a head scratcher, is that like I studied applied positive psychology, but I work at the very other end of the spectrum where I'm like, thinking positive doesn't fucking help. And if you think it is, well, that's part of the problem. So that would make some people scratch their head.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't compute too well in my brain, but we can talk about that off air because I'd love to hear more. What is the biggest thing over the last 2 years you've changed your mind on?
Probably, so that was about the time when I cut and left the soccer jobs, where I was embedded in a team and I was making a difference. At least I felt I was. And the scoreboard might suggest I was. But
sounds like it.
And so I left with a view to, I'm going to go set up my own business, and I don't give a fuck what people think about who I work with, even though that is, obviously, it's a good branding thing to be able to say I've been with the Red Sox and the 76ers and Philadelphia Eagles, Australian football teams. Like, I can drop names till the cows come home, and that's great for my brand. However, I was very, like I said with my AFL days, my identity was that I was a football player. And I was concerned that my identity as a professional was that I work with famous people. Yeah.
So, but you've been there before, so you know those feelings now, right?
I know them.
Still caught you?
It was a process of, I'm going to do this. And then I noticed after 2 or 3 months that I had an opportunity. So the hockey team here, New York Rangers, come ringing. Hey, we're looking for someone who does your job. We understand you're on the market. actually even more tempting was a call that I got from CAA, who's like the biggest agency. And they're doing an exec search for a large major market franchise. I'm like, okay, well, look, I've just left that world and I'm not going back unless one or two conditions exist. I'll think about it. One of which it has to be in like LA or New York, maybe Miami, maybe London, but otherwise I'm not doing it. Or if there's like a generational talent there, like if it's a Lionel Messi or a LeBron James or whatever, they're like, well, okay, well, let's just share that we're talking to you about a job at the Los Angeles Lakers. And I'm like, fuck, okay. And so, and I'd already made a commitment to myself that I wasn't going to do this, but my ego got in the way a little bit, and it's like, oh, well, fuck, I'll listen. I'll get involved. And so over the last 2 years, I've managed to have other things come up that have presented those kind of opportunities. And I've just said a flat no, which has been an evolution for me because I'm not as tied. Like, that's a sexy thing to be able to say. I went to LA at the end of LeBron's career. That would have been great. But I'm now much more comfortable being like, I just work with people, and if you know them, great. If you don't know them, also great. This is just what I do. And that has been definitely a big shift for me.
Yeah, right. I wonder if it's worth just keep putting your price up until there's a point where they go, okay. And you go, oh, fuck.
I love the businessman in you.
Honestly, that's what I hear. I think, all right, well, if you're turning down these offers, every time you turn it down, next time an offer comes in, the price goes up till there's a point where you're going to go.
See, the issue that I have with that is probably twofold, and they're both hypothetical issues, thankfully. One being, if you keep putting your price up, eventually you get a psychopath who has enough money that just buys you. And if money's the only reason for making the decision,
you can still say no, remember?
Oh, well then, okay.
Yeah, you don't have to say yes, but like the price keeps going up until you go, oh yeah, this actually feels all right.
All right, okay, well then that takes that one out. But the other thing is, like, being in a position now where I can pick and choose. I work with some clients who don't pay at the rate that would be my market rate, but it's been some of the most fulfilling and rewarding work because I chose to do it. A, because they're good people, and B, because I see, okay, this can have a much bigger societal impact. Working with the WNBA team is a good example. Mm-hmm. They were the reason I was in the ticker tape parade that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They are changing the conversation about what women and girls can do. It's a very cool thing to be involved with. Mm-hmm. But if it was just a checkbook decision, I ain't even taking the call.
Yeah.
And so being in a position to be able to do that, to me it's a huge luxury.
Yeah.
But also it's a shift in my thinking where probably 5 or 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been taking it, not because of financial reasons, but just because it's not sexy enough and it doesn't fit my identity.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. That was a very interesting answer. I like that one a lot. So next one is, and you cannot say your parents, is what is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
Oh, this is a good one. It may not be the kindest thing.
Top 10, it's fine.
It's up there. And particularly in the context of all the stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I'm flying from Melbourne to Philadelphia in an AFL off-season. I haven't even dreamt it. Well, I might have thought occasionally about living here, but there's no signs that I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not even enrolled in a course.
Yep.
In fact, this is how I end up falling down the rabbit hole. I'm reading a book on the plane over the Pacific called How Children Succeed by Paul Tough. Great book. Just about developing young minds and characters. Part of my prep for working with young AFL players. And halfway through it, I read this thing about Angela Duckworth and her book on grit, her work on grit, which I'd read a few times, but I'd always seen that she's at the University of Pennsylvania, which to me sounds like where the vampires are from, right? It's far, far away. I'd have no idea where it is. And then it actually says University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I'm like, fuck, I'm going to Philadelphia. I'm actually on my way to Philadelphia. This is like the alchemist coming to life. Like, this is a sign.
Yeah.
So I land in San Fran. This is back in the day where you don't have Wi-Fi on planes and barely have it on your phone. I hook up to the internet and I send out a quick email to one guy who I knew had been at University of Pennsylvania, who I'd met a couple of times. He's a good dude. He's into sport. We talked about the Yankees or some shit. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to Philly. I've just read about Angela Duckworth being there. I know you were there one time. Random chance. Do you have any way I can get in touch with her? Rush for the next plane, get on it, land in Philly at like 1 a.m. And I get to my hotel. I open my computer, more to check other emails. I'm not expecting this guy to reply because it was already 5 p.m. in San Fran. And there's a reply from him saying, yep, awesome, buddy. I'll catch you when you're here and let me make some connections. And then there's 4 emails that follow to 4 of the most famous psychologists in the world. One invented positive psychology, like legit, Martin Seligman. One is Angela Duckworth. One is Adam Grant, the foremost business psychologist in the world.
Yeah. And he's got a podcast, right? Is that the same
Yes.
Adam Grant? Yeah.
Multi-New York Times bestselling author,
great.
legend. And one is to Karen Rivich, who developed the resilience program at the US Army. And all of them, except for Angela, ironically, say, I'm happy to meet you while you're here. I sneak into Angela's office anyway just to, hey, how you going? I came to see you, just wanted to say hi. And it turns out that at University of Pennsylvania, they've got this course and it leads to me enrolling. I then go home, they fire the coach I'm with, I get a payout, I come over and I join school and off my life goes in a different direction, right?
Great.
But this all comes from one guy receiving an email he'd met once or twice, an email from some random Aussie that he'd met once or twice saying, can you connect me with one of the most in-demand psychologists in the world? And he goes and does it. And not only that, he connects me to people who are even more influential than her. The kindness thing, it's probably not in the grand scheme of kindness that, effusively, positively, emotively kind, but it was just something that was so, it was over the top. He didn't need to do the amount that he did, but it changed my life, obviously, in so many, that was a pivotal email thread.
Sure.
Right? And he didn't have to do that. So, Reb, shout out to Reb
Revley.
Reb
Revley.
Yeah.
Nice.
Great author name.
Yeah, it is a great author name. So with that in mind, how has that impacted your decision making and how you give to the world?
Anytime someone asks me to do stuff, no matter how busy I might be or tenuous the connection might be, I might have met you once, I genuinely think about what that did for me, and I'm like, look, I'm happy to try.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't get you tickets to the next game at the last minute.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's too much of a reach for me to put you in touch with the GM of that team or of a psychologist at this university. But for the most part, being able to connect with young people who are just new in the city or who are trying to do something and all they're doing is sending an email and asking, fuck yeah, well, let's see what we can do. Because to me, that's, to have been blessed to have had that, I feel a responsibility to pass it on and give it to others as well.
Yeah. Cool.
You'd be a bit of an asshole if you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the goal with kind deeds. You take it and you continue it on, and it's just a flow of positive,
good shit.
Good shit.
It's actually Adam Grant's first bestseller was called Give and Take.
Really?
And there's a bunch of research, and he collated it all on pro-social motivation and on being able to actually do good shit just for the sake of doing good shit. But generally that means that you'll have good shit done for you when you need it or even when you don't, or you don't expect it. And there was a good bunch of research that showed that, if you split people into givers and takers based on a certain set of behaviors or characteristics, the givers will generally do better than the takers because the takers have a reciprocity problem.
Yeah, right.
If you've been an asshole and I need to do you a favor, I'm less likely to do that favor.
Yeah,
but if you've been a good bloke and you ask me to do this thing, and generally they'll get ahead. Usually there are also some givers at the bottom of the thing because they get treated like doormats. But fascinating book, you should read it. You'll love it.
Maybe I'll talk to Adam Grant one day.
One day.
That'd be a great one. I'm conscious of your time. You can quickly answer this one if you'd like. If you could only recommend one book, podcast, experience where they can only do one thing in their life and it's going to have the most, significant impact in the way they think or how they view the world, what would it be?
They can only listen to one podcast ever.
One podcast,
ever.
One book,
Done.
One experience. That's like they can go back to it, but it's got to be the most impactful thing they can do. What do you think it would be?
Go climb a mountain. Like really climb a mountain.
A real one.
Like go to Everest.
Yeah.
Or go to Nepal at least and climb the second one.
Yeah.
The Annapurna Ranges. That's the third one. But I did that. And I had no intent of doing it. I was there for my brother. My brother and his wife open an orphanage, and props to them to making the rest of us look like average people.
That's what superstars do sometimes, right?
Exactly. I went over there for the opening. I was lucky enough to be with a cricket team in India at that point, and so I got to jump over the border. I'm there for like 5 days, see the opening. It's great stuff. And then I've got 3 days to kill, and they're back at work. And they're like, and I'm like, should I do it? Like, I'm not into that shit. I'm busy, got stuff to do, emails to send, so I can stay here and work. They're like, mate, you're in Nepal. Climb a mountain. All right, cool. And so I could do this 3-day trek, which is not huge in the scheme of climbing Everest, but for me it was, because as I said before, I don't like to run more than a mile. And I start out on day one, I'm racing everyone. I'm walking faster than, I'm picking the next person, I'm going to get past them, then I'm going to beat them to that thing. I'm just competing with everyone, not looking at anything, getting up the hill.
Yeah.
Day 2, don't know if it's the oxygen or if I'm just settling in, because I'm also going by myself, so I'm not talking to anyone either.
Yeah.
So almost a silent retreat. Day 2, I continue to walk. I'm a bit slower, taking in the little things. Day 3, I'm letting people past me. I'm just slowly walking, looking at the scenery. It's amazing. And I would say that experience was a changer for me in that probably it started my shift from always I got to compete, which was part of my reason for being stuck in the AFL thing. It was the only place I felt like I could be the best.
Yeah.
To being like, just
smell the roses.
Walk the path.
Yeah.
You don't have to
trust the process.
Yeah. Just do what's in front of you. You're on a hill in Nepal. Fucking walk up it.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was an experience that I think was profound enough that, particularly if you're only, I don't want to limit people on only listening to one podcast and only reading one book, but if you can only do one thing, climb one mountain.
A big one.
You don't have to go to any others, but do it, and I guarantee you'll be different afterwards.
Got it. Sounds like the same guy who was saying, why are you guys pitching so slow? Day one.
Exactly. Let's hurry this shit up.
That's funny. Paddy, so is there anything that you're excited about at the moment that you'd like to let the listeners in on?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that I have a book. It won't come out for a while. It's probably a couple of years away.
We're going to do a round 2 when the book's out and you want to promote it. This will be a top 100 podcast by that point.
100%. So I'm excited about that because it gives me an ability to get better at my thinking, sharpen and focus what I do intuitively with people when I'm one-on-one in a way that people can use if I don't get to sit with them. I can still help people. So I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about Thanksgiving Day, which is a couple of days away, mostly because I just get to hang around, eat food and watch football.
Yeah, I love it. Looking forward to it too. I'm going to Connecticut. Yeah, a friend of mine's let me come to their family Thanksgiving. So I'm locked into the
What are you bringing?
Probably just like a guacamole or something, maybe some Tim Tams.
That will... Absolutely.
That's a good shout. And
but they're mine. Don't even think about
it. That is my gift to you. So where can people find you if they're interested? You just grab the tip.
My public facing persona is on Instagram, Paddy's Gram. If you want me from a professional standpoint, then LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to find me. I'm part of the reason I'm excited about the book is that I'm not very good at promotion, self-promotion, all this sort of stuff. Generally, people have found out about me because other people will mention me in their interviews. But signing with Penguin Random House, they're going to be setting up a bunch of websites and front-facing stuff that eventually, when we do the follow-up interview, you'll be able to find me on those things. But right now, the best way is Instagram or LinkedIn. Great.
And the final question is, what is the meaning of life?
Do what's in front of you. Yeah, I don't think there's much more to it than that. I'm a bit of a nihilist at times, where like we can pretend this is all really fancy, but in reality, in 100 years, no one's gonna. They might remember your name, no one's gonna remember mine.
I don't know, mate. Maybe you're doing some. Even if you're just a domino that leads to some other dominoes.
If I was a domino, what number would I be?
Number 7.
7.
Yeah.
I pictured 9.
That's crazy. That's ridiculous. Being ridiculous. I cut this. Paddy,
right,
thank you for your
mate.
time. Thank you for your energy. This was great. Appreciate you. And if anyone's made it this far, please give us a fuck. if anyone's made
Please
it
give
this,
us a fuck.
please give a fuck. No, if anyone's made it this far, please subscribe. And I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts in the comments or on Spotify, YouTube, etc. Until next time.
Awesome, man. Appreciate
Cool.
it.
Thanks, Paddy.